Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Sunday morning roundtable discussion. Morning is Sunday, July 14th, 2019. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America, and we welcome you all. And we will start this morning with our morning prayer.
From Christian Science versus Pantheism by Mary Baker Eddy. Set your affections on things above. Love one another. Commune at the table of our Lord in one spirit. Worship in spirit and in truth. And if daily adoring, imploring, and living the divine life, truth, love, then shall partake of the bread that cometh down from heaven, drink of the cup of salvation, and be baptized in spirit.
Thank you. Our subject today is sacrament. Golden text, Psalm 51. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. Any comments on that?
Well, I certainly know when I came here, I had been completely broken down. And that was the only way I could be ready to actually be here. So,
thank you very much.
That's good. So what does it mean to be broken?
On the forum, Joanne gave us the definition, which was a good one. To break, to subdue the passions, to train in obedience, make tractable, as to break a horse. You know how stubborn a horse can be, so we can be pretty darn stubborn ourselves, that human sense of ourselves, the human will, it bucks and refuses obedience. And it does need to be broken in submission to God, not for his sake, but for our sake. And this lesson this week is a very, very important one. It touches on the deeper things of God that are needed to be taught. I think they've been just sort of swept under the carpet because some of them are the demands, if you will, that people want to run from. In the responsive reading, it says about the blood of bulls and goats and ashes of heifer, but then how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot, purge your conscience from dead works, to serve the living God. Now, what's the word purge mean?
Empty it.
Like a thorough cleaning.
Thank you. Yes, thorough cleaning, purifying.
Clean out the garbage.
Cleansing. And I know before I had this, it was dead works. I was just kind of existing, but I certainly wasn't serving the living God. And you see, this is the ultimate purpose of all of us, and it is something that must be found of us. And if we don't get it one way, we will get it another way, but we will get it. I'm going to read today from quite a bit of other sources besides the lesson to point to you what needs to be done in this regard and in the regard of other things we'll be talking about. This is from Mary Baker Eddy's 6 Days of Revelation, page 200, compiled by Richard Oakes. Just now, the darkest spot on the horizon of mortal mind that Christian Science can illumine is envy, and the strife for who shall be greatest. It pushes Christianity aside to elbow in a crowd of robbers that enter not in by the door. Truth but would climb up some other way. Obscure, unlettered, unprincipled people are filling the field of mind healers, who are mind killers, building their only superstructure on false foundation, the power of evil and the substance of matter. They are working out through mortal mind the claim of total depravity in all its forms of animal magnetism. They rise on the merits of the true healer to fall at length from their own demerits. The above qualities, entering so largely into their work, engender the most difficult forms of disease. 20 years ago, when I first brought this subject to the consideration of the race, to be a Christian Science mind healer was no bid for respectability, popularity, wealth. It was a sharp appeal to conscience, spiritual growth, moral courage. The question then was, can you drink the cup? On this basis, there was no danger of injuring oneself or one's neighbor. The pioneer work has been done faithfully. Now comes the inquiry. Shall this work be overthrown by charlatans of the baser sort? Naught but the unselfish purpose, the higher understanding of God, and the love of man are incentives to real mind healing. Once in this direction, and persecution, hardship, sacrifice only lead into green pastures and beside the still waters. And that is Mary Baker Eddy. So you see, this what has so damaged the church, the envy, the rivalry, the who shall be greatest. And it was all, what was it seeking? All the wrong things, the glory, the fame, or whatever they thought. Instead, the question is, who shall drink of my cup? And when that is the question, all these other things fall by the wayside, because for the most part, nobody wants to do that. And yet, in order to be a true healer, you have to at least be willing to some degree to walk this walk and to drink of the cup. And with it will come this purging. I was reading too, it was brought out with Christ Jesus for every wonderful time he had the healings he did, then he would come and have to face sometimes seemingly terrible things and overcome that. It was an ongoing process of purification, understanding the unreality of anything besides God good. So there is Mrs. Evans would teach us that we do not go into the practice or get into the practice. The practice gets into us. It comes when you walk this path. And we have had people at times who've come to church, wanting to be listed. That was what they wanted. Well, to me, a big bell rings when that is what you want, because you have no idea what it requires. But that doesn't mean that it can't be a deep longing of the heart, deep, cherished longing of the heart, but nothing that you outwardly seek after. God will place you there when the time is right, when you've passed the test. So this is what this purging is about, and this is what purging your conscience, the serving the living God. And as I spoke about last week, you are all practitioners. Once you name the name, you are on this walk, and you have your own vineyard and your own place to work in, and people that come, that God brings to your experience, that you can see correctly and heal. And so, step by step, here a little, there a little, you grow into this wonderful science And believe me, whatever purging has to be done, as those of us here know, the rewards and the results are just unspeakable. I have never been so happy in my life, so peaceful, so joyful,
So
secure, everything.
Unafraid.
Afraid, that's a big one. Thank you. And why? Because I had to be purged of all my baggage that I had. So even though it might be difficult when you're walking through it, you keep walking. And the results and the rewards are wondrous. But believe me, it's an ongoing process. Not like you ever just arrive, at least not while we're here in the flesh. Or seem to be in the flesh. Of course, we're not. We're in the spirit. So
that's an important point, is that you don't actually go into practice or go into a position. Church.
Gary, you need to speak up a little more, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. The point is, you don't actually go into the practice, or you don't go into a position in the church. The practice comes to you. Same with any position in the church. The position comes to you. And it's just like Mrs. Eddy says in Science and Health, section 11 of Science in Science and Health. God selects for the highest service one who has grown into such a fitness for it as renders any abuse of the mission an impossibility.
I think this is why we're told not, you're not setting any human ambition here. Not
Exactly.
about that.
you will rise into the position. God does the promoting. And that is true, really, in every walk of life. Not just the church is certainly a wonderful example of it, but it's true everywhere because all is life. Life is God, and it's everywhere. So when you're seeking positions, job positions, you know that God is the one who does the promoting. You prepare yourself, be ready for whatever the job is, and He will place you. True demonstration, that's how it works. It comes to you. It will come to you. All things come to you that you need, whether it's a job, home, companionship, health. You do the preparatory work to be ready to receive the good that God is already pouring forth, but maybe your blinded eyes can't see it. So awaken and see. Now, in the first part of the Bible, and Florence speaks to this, when Jesus was getting his disciples, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. And what did they do? How did they react to that?
Immediately they left their nets and followed.
Thank
They
you.
left their net and their father.
Yes, they left all. Many of them lucrative jobs. They were, and it was immediate. They didn't have to sit and wonder about it.
No pros and cons list.
And they were moved by the Spirit to leave it all. They realized what a wondrous thing was happening. And Mrs. Eddy speaks about that too in her home. You know, she required people to leave their homes and come. I think most people stayed just 2 years, but there were many, as we know, Calvin Fry stayed for 28. And what they learned and what they gained being in their home was immeasurable. But they were willing. They were willing. And then the rest follows. And it came to pass that as they went the way, a certain man said unto him, Lord, I will follow thee whithersoever thou goest. And Jesus said unto him, Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. And he said unto another, Follow me. But he said, Lord, suffer me first to go and bury my father. Jesus said, Let the dead bury the dead. But go thou and preach the kingdom of God. Another, Lord, I will follow thee, but let me first go bid them farewell which are at my home. Jesus said, No man having his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. This whole lesson, excuses. They're going to sing that today. It's a lovely song called Excuses, Excuses. We hear them every day. I don't think we've sung it in many years in our church, but it's wonderful. Excuses. You want to know why the church isn't thriving? Excuses. We all have our reasons why we don't come to church, why we don't testify, why we don't study science and health, why. We have our self-justifications, which is the adamant of error. Mrs. Eddy had a sign, I believe, in her home. I think we had it in the print room. It might still be there. Rule in Mrs. Eddy's household. Simplicity, accuracy, and economy. And then do you know what the rest is? Excuses are intolerable. You weren't allowed an excuse. If God tells you to do something, well, then of course you do it, and no excuses are allowed. Now, it's different if you're being asked to do something that is not of God, well, then you don't do it. But you don't need to excuse yourself. You can just say, sorry, I'm not doing it. I had to find this out the hard way because I was a master at excuses. I always had a reason not to do anything or do something. I mean, certainly testifying was way above my expertise, or however you want to call it. Everything was challenging for me. And so I chose not to. And then in Mrs. Eddy's, Martha Wilcox's book, Addresses, on page 160, this is in her article called The Definition of Intelligence. She writes, the harmful effect of alibis and excuses on the individual is far more serious than we realize. Many persons are in hospitals, even in insane hospitals, because they have hidden behind an alibi or an excuse until their so-called human intellect is enfeebled and impaired. They permitted their headaches, their indigestion, their nerves, belief in persons and circumstances to be an alibi or excuse for something that was hard to do or that they did not want to do, until they literally lost their power to decide things intelligently. An alibi or excuse is a form of deceit that is used to hide the facts in the case, and the results are most disastrous to the one who indulges in them. And that was where I was headed. Hospital, insane asylum, all lovely places, right? Because I was excusing why I couldn't do things. I was terrified when I first came here. Mrs. Evans was so demanding. I mean, there was no way I could get to church all the time because I was sick so much. But I read that and decided, well, I was either going to do it or not, and now was the time. So I began to, and it taught me to what?
Handle animal magnetism.
Yes, it says which is always the crux of the whole thing. It taught me courage and backbone. It taught me mainly to throw myself on the bosom of God and rely on Him. There was no other way I could do all these things. I couldn't. Mary could not. And that was huge to learn that. Mary cannot, but God could. So you determine if it's right by God for you to do something, and then you know He'll give you all the intelligence, supply, health, joy, whatever else is needed to serve the living God. And you start to get traction and you start to grow. And all those problems that I had, that I couldn't do this and I couldn't do that, they all vanished. Eventually, one by one, they left. Hard to even realize they had held me in such bondage.
Once you're healed of these, it really has hold on you.
We're losing you again, Gary.
Sorry. Because once you get to the point where you stand up to these excuses, they no longer have a hold on you. It's a freedom. The greatest freedom we could have. To be free to do what God tells you to do, even though you've never done it before, even though you don't know how to do it, even though you can't imagine how to do it. You can do it. Because with God, all things are possible.
Yeah, we ask Him to show you.
Exactly.
We'll read number 9 in Science and Health.
I'll read it. The generous liver may object to the author's small estimate of the pleasures of the table. The sinner sees, in the system taught in this book, that the demands of God must be met. The petty intellect is alarmed by constant appeals to mind. The licentious disposition is discouraged over its slight spiritual prospects. When all men are bidden to the feast, the excuses come. One has a farm, another has a merchandise, and therefore they cannot accept.
Thank you, Betty. And the excuses come. So my ear are always attuned to excuses. I get where I'm quite humorous. I was going to write a book on them. They're so varied and everyone has their own, but ultimately they're all the same. And once that one excuse, you allow that one excuse, then next week there'll be a different excuse for not doing the exact same thing. They'll say, oh, well, next week I'll be able to do it, but I just can't do it now. Whoops, do it. No, can't do it then. Again, if it's not for you to do, if you don't feel God is directing you to do it, you have every right to say no. And that I want to make very, very clear. But the demands of God must be met. The demands, and most of those demands, we know, life, truth, and love, are the only legitimate demands on man. And that means you've got to stop your hating now. You've got to start loving yourself. You've got to start obeying the Golden Rule and the Sermon on the Mount, the 10 Commandments. Can't put all that off. You got to do it now. You have to be willing to rebuke error today. You can't say, oh, I'll do that when I'm feeling more like it. The watching point speaks to that. If you know the error is not the person, it's just an error, that gives you the dominion to rebuke it without thinking you're going to hurt or harm a person. And that's your rule to do it, and always from love. But when you let unprincipled things go on and on and on in your home, in your life, and you have excuses as to why you don't, eventually you will have a major problem at the end of the road. And it will seem insurmountable, not because it really is, but because you've let it go on in your thoughts so long. It's the mountain. It seems like a big mountain. Got to face it sometime. Why not today?
I love what you read earlier where it said that it will get to the point where you lose the ability to make a decision intelligently. I know I felt like I didn't know how to make decisions before coming here. And that just seems like a good thing to keep track of. If I feel like I don't know how to make a decision, where are the excuses that led up to that? So,
well, good. Thank you very much. That's so true. Signs that animal magnetism or afoot is confusion. You can't make decisions. You're depressed. You can't seem to think straight. You've let things, it didn't happen just one morning you wake up and things are a mess. You've been working on it very, very diligently to avoid meeting what needs to be met. And when you know that God is the only power, and whatever seems to be confronting you is not the truth, but illusion, as much, however real it seems, then you start to get the dominion. First start out with the smaller demonstrations and then increase. And if you keep it, if you're so instant in truth, error is always too late. You won't have these huge calamities at the end of the road. You'll just be knocking them down as you walk along.
That little serpent won't grow into a big red dragon.
Yes. So what excuses are you making for not doing what you know you should be doing? What are your excuses? Take a good look at them. Again, something you're not to do because God is not of God, then absolutely do not do it. But if God is urging you to serve the living God and you're not, find out what it is and make sure you don't let it happen. And Linda wrote to it about being absorbed in material selfhood and also those buried in the belief of sin and self. When you're so submerged in life and matter and you're pleasing the physical senses, well, it's hard for you to see, hard for you to feel that you even want to serve the living God. And that's where you get purged, don't you? Yes. All the things you thought you enjoyed so much, perhaps, everything starts to go to hell quickly. Go to hell in a handbag, as they say. That purging is difficult, but it's essential. And it is love that reforms the sinner, Mrs. Betty says. Love. The love that loves doesn't want you to remain in that hellish state of life. So anyone else on excuses? And, in that story, what is the story? It about parable, a man who was having a great supper and bade many. And they all, with one consent, began to make excuse, right? None of them could come. You see, we have a great big feast here in Christian Science. So don't make the excuses. So who ended up going?
The people on the wayside.
Oh, yes.
Sinners and the...
Yes. And so it is. So it is today, too. Those who it's like the allegory, those who are living in the big mansions and content in their materiality, they have no interest in any of this. But those who are in dire straits do.
Those who are broken.
Those who are broken, thank you.
And hence the beatitude, blessed are the poor.
Yes.
In spirit. For what?
For theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Thank you, Shard. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The broken ones. So never think it's a badge of shame or anything. Everyone has to go through this. And the results, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And again, it's cross-bearing, and whosoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Likewise, whoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. And again, these are the harder words, but Lawrence, you spoke to this. What is this getting at?
You mean the hate?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's not hate in that sense. It means God first. Nothing can be more important than your walk with God. In fact, I feel that when you do that first, you get the right sense of love. And so it's not like you're leaving behind something you should have. It tells us that we can really never not have what we need. What we're giving up is what we don't need. And I also learned the fact that anything that draws us away from our walk with God, why would we want it, to take it along? So it's really, to me, the bottom line is God first.
Yes.
And that's the only life that satisfies anyway.
Yes. It's all what you make a God of. It's not wrong necessarily to have home or a family. I mean, Martha Wilcox speaks to that. But if you make a God of it, it's wrong. If you worship it, and if you have a personal sense of it, which means what?
Thinking it belongs to you and not to God.
Pardon me?
Thinking it belongs to you and not to God, that it's your personal whatever.
Thank you. Yes. It's yours. It's my home. It's my child. I own it. I can tell it what to do. It's got to serve me. It's got to be a doctor. It's got to do this and that. That is personal sense. It is a godless state. And this, my friends, is what you must hate. Hate. The word loathe, Mrs. Evans used to talk about that to us. Because if you are lukewarm on some of these issues, you will be fine about it. But a personal sense of things is a killer. It's godless. When you think you own it. And this is what Christ was saying when he said to hate, which of course led to a flurry of forums, which were wonderful, and I thank for them. Many things brought out. But it's so important that we understand this personal sense because it destroys. We own nothing. It all belongs to God. And then Parthens sent us a whole list of parents thought they owned their child and wanted their child to do what they wanted them to do. And of course, the child ended up doing what it felt God wanted it to do and ended up doing tremendous, wonderful things. This personal ownership is deadly. And we can add to that list this, which is in the Blue Book, page 32. Mrs. Eddy, father, sister, etc. When my father told me if I disgraced the family with Christian Science, I should never darken his door again, and my sister would not speak to me, I gave them all up. I am now being punished by the fruits, the Glover case now in court, of my marriage. Only as you give up all for Christ can you be a Christian Scientist. If the wife comes to Christian Science, she should show the husband so he will help her to do this work and give up all. If a husband comes to Christian Science, he should show his wife so she will let him do his duty to this cause. We are all working together with one aim, the cause. I am not breaking up families. I am all the time praying for harmony. I only show them what Christian Science is and leave them to make their own decision. We cannot go up a mountain carrying our baggage. We must be free. Mary Baker Eddy. If she had listened to her father, she never would have had the revelation of Christian Science. It's deadly, and you must hate it, and you must purge it from yourself if you're trying to do it to your own children. Mrs. Evans, eventually in our church, some of you know this, she did come after marriages. People ran like hell. But if she saw one or the other spouse dragging the other one down, she would speak to it. Now, we don't really do that anymore because, I just don't feel that it should be done anymore like that. We had a very specific mission to fulfill. We still do, but I leave it to your own conscience. But if you are living with someone who is dragging you down, you need to deal with it. That's what she's saying here, isn't she? You can't just ignore it. There is a belief if two people are living together and one is a spiritually minded one and the other is a materially minded one, what happens?
The spiritually minded one gets dragged down.
Yes.
That's the belief.
That's the belief.
The belief, yeah.
So what say ye? Again, this is everyone's demonstration to do as they see fit, as God guides them to do it. And as Mrs. Eddy says, she prayed always for harmony. Certainly so do I. But ultimately, this cause, this mission, is what's very important. And there's some who, I know some people whose wife or husband, they don't necessarily come to church, but they don't tell their wife or husband, no, you can't do that. Why are you spending so much time? Why are you doing this? Why aren't we going out playing golf? I want your attention. Blah-de-blah-de-blah. They let them do it. And they respect it. And that's fine. It's when you get this constant friction going on in your home. And if that is true, well, God helps you with it. And there are many ways of seeing them correctly. You see them in the science. You see them living the science, because you will bring about what you see. And ultimately, we are all Christian Scientists. There's nothing worse than to think, I'm a Christian Scientist and you are stupid, whatever, and you don't know all that I know. Well, that's going to keep them out of the church like better than anything else can. So these are very important lessons to learn, and they are the deeper lessons. And it's why sometimes people think they don't want to walk this walk, because they say, what do they say? Too hard. But
give up.
but after trying the other road, this way is actually infinitely easier. That's just the devil that says that. I've tried the other road. It was hell. And remember, you've got all the power of God working in you and through you to do this work. And along with that, those excuses, this is also in the Blue Book, which always sobered me, on page 182. What is it that argues to people you don't want to practice? It is too uphill work, and you can get along without it. What is it that sends people out of town when they are needed at home? That sends them to Europe or some out-of-the-way place when they might be better employed? What says to people, confine your work entirely to the poor and the uninfluential? What sends a lady who is in a position to do well in science to the childbed? What unites an unmarried scientist who is promising as such to one who can destroy such usefulness and blight such prospects? What is it that does that?
Animal magnetism.
I don't mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you have choices to make today. You have a path to take, and you can either take it with God, consulting him, leaning not unto thine own understanding, but in all thy ways acknowledging him, and he shall direct thy path. And then this from Mary Baker Eddy's 6 Days of Revelation, on 281 and 282. When Jesus called on men to hate father and mother, while he damned the woman who thought they had borne children of their own making, when he told them not to accept for one moment that they owed existence to a sexual father, the authorities had to try to destroy him. The outraged leaders were the theologians of the day. These were they who prided themselves on having hedged their sinful practices about with such regulations and virtues that God was smiling on their claim to creation under certain blessed family conditions. This, again, pride of life, a personal sense of things, that you own it. It must be hated. And then she goes on to say, even more so, as a Christian Zionist, words like our Father, Mother, God could pass as just a comfortable phrase for future ethereal existence, to be brought nearer perhaps by a lot of non-sacrificial lip service. But for man to govern his acts under a conviction of such a phrase's present unyielding reality and relinquish all thought of pushing God aside so that man could enjoy a little pretense at human generation was a hard line for Christian Science to sell. At first, truth must seem to tread inoffensively, and probably so for several decades. Now this. If Christian Science children did, however, consider that their children were their own creation, that is, springs of thought wedded to error, instead of the creations of God appearing to them, they would be worse off than the merely ignorant. Mrs. Eddy's statements were bringing a different reaction from one she could have thought was obvious by now. Evidently, she had to drop the subject as she did with her unfulfilled prophecy in the 16th edition about the hastening demise of free love. Instead, she had to warn students about the resulting setback that would ensue from the thinking she encountered. To some, she sent this conclusion: to watch and handle, quote, cruel lie trying to make itself thought that the children of Christian scientists shall be the offscouring of the earth, end quote. What is she saying?
That if you didn't have the true understanding of Christian Science, that the generations to follow would be greater sinners than a regular what you would call those that weren't exposed to the true science or science at all.
Yes, we have a responsibility. If you want to call the name, you got to walk the walk. And if you think you're a personal creator and take pride in your personal property and wanted to do certain things, well, very, very dangerous to do that. And we do see it. We see a lot of children of Christian Scientists who are so rebellious toward it. And it's probably their false teaching of it that causes them to be that way. So,
but if their parents had clearly known that those dear children were God's and not their own, the children would have grown up very different.
that's why, you have to really understand and work at this science. It's not to be dabbled in. And it's where the organization has failed. And I'm not pointing any fingers, but it must be the correct teaching. And I will say, suppressing these books that are so helpful, that cannot be right. How could it be right?
No, it's wicked. It's mortal mind all over again.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about. Mortal mind, a human sense of things, a personal sense of things without God in it. Now, are there any questions before we conclude? There is a lot to this. Again, always go on for hours, but and there's a lot on the forum that you can read and gain from.
I'd just like to ask, what was the purpose in the Mother Church to suppress the books by Mrs. Eddy's workers? I mean, what was their purpose?
Yeah, I get asked that all the time, and
Well, what is the purpose of writing 2 + 2 = 5?
If you really intentionally do that, then you are doing it to mislead or to cloud something.
Yeah, it's a mistake. It's not of God. The directors genuinely thought people would not understand or would misinterpret these books. They were afraid that people would not be able to think for themselves. They thought that they were Mrs. Eddy's
gatekeepers.
professors. Yes. They thought that they had to be the gatekeepers to what people read. This is all mortal mind. This is all human fear and belief. This is not of God.
But also, with all these beautiful old publications that have been found by everybody and is being shared at Plainfield, one of the things that's totally hidden is that this didn't start at a certain point after Mrs. Eddy passed on. This was a continuous, ongoing mortal mind and animal magnetism fighting the truth the whole way through, because all the early people left exactly because of things like the wife didn't like Mrs. Eddy's teaching of the husband, or them, both of them, or whatever. It was always these nuances of human interrelations that cost her all of the early students, and it was continuous. It never stopped. And Edwin Bates points out how even through the building of the Mother Church, it wasn't one glorious, easy task. And one of the things that is really interesting is that nobody knew that he was there, really. He kind of sneaked in, so nobody was fighting him. They were fighting the board, so the board was kind of having issues with Mrs. Eddy, but it wasn't their own fault. It was this outside working against the whole cause that was doing it. And Mrs. Eddy did say that she never could do the pure right. She always had to do the least of the two evils.
Right, that's right. Well, it shows an organization when the human mind takes over. It's the human mind. So that's the only real explanation.
And we can always expect human belief to fight the revelation of truth. So don't be surprised when you see mistakes being made or resistance to the truth.
Misunderstanding. Misinterpretation.
Yeah. Don't be put off by it. It has happened throughout the history of mankind.
And Mrs. Eddy intended the primitive teachings of Jesus. That was what her church is on. It's in the manual, the primitive teachings. And we know what happened there. After 200 years, it became the Catholic Church, human organization. So we will end today. Jeremy put this on the carousel, which is a beautiful article by John Dorley, which is sort of where we are right now, about true motherhood.
This is True Motherhood by John Dorley. One of the most dangerous beliefs is a false sense of motherhood, which is induced by personal sense. It operates in the world and in families through making people think, first of all, that they own a child and that child has got to do certain things. Quite frankly, in the practice of Christian Science, you see so often that the effect on the children of a false human sense of motherhood is very detrimental. If you have a true sense of motherhood, you will let a child develop naturally according to its own spiritual identity. You will uphold it for a standard in your own life and in every detail. If you have a true sense of motherhood, you will uplift the divine motherhood for it. And that will always guide both you and the child as to what to say and do in the human. Because divine motherhood is universal, impartial, love.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just the right sense of it. That's kind of where we are today. And, if you have a child you're trying to control or tell what to do, they will rebel. And if they don't rebel, they'll probably be reduced to a loathsome wreck. So let them be what God made them, and you be what God made you, and we'll all be happy. So, thank you all for joining us today, and we will go on to a wonderful sacrament service.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.